Why isn't India building skyscrapers? In a country with over 1.4 billion people, where cities are growing and overcrowded, one would expect that the best option is to build vertically. Well, surprisingly, that isn't the case. India isn't the skyscraping concrete jungle one might expect. So, why? Picture this. You're in a classy high-rise apartment on the 30th floor and all sorts of posh. Then, bam! The electricity is out. The water supply stops, and you're confused how you ended up here of all places. That's pretty much the situation that developers in India are eager to avert by not going up high. The infrastructure of Indian cities is not very impressive and resembles a computer of the 1990s, constantly about to freeze. Skyscrapers demand a lot of power, water, sewage, and etc. But India's power grid can barely address present demand. Throw in a few skyscrapers that consume power like your AC in a heat wave, and the grid might just give up entirely. And not to mention, there's a water problem. It's sometimes not as easy as turning the faucet and getting a small stream of water. Some Indian cities, especially in the summer or during droughts, have a more bring-your-own-water aesthetic. Skyscrapers require a steady supply of water pressure, something that many cities around the world cannot provide. But for water to be more of a luxury than a necessity, it's difficult to envision any developer proceeding with the construction of a new tower. Then enters the FSI, or Floor Space Index, a much needed and sought after commodity in India. Sounds technical, but think of it like this. It's the strict parent of the Indian real estate market, saying, no, you can't build any taller until you clean up your room. It refers to the ratio of floor space that can be built over a plot of land, and Indian FSIs are particularly punitive. Take Mumbai for example. The FSI in the city was fixed at a paltry 1.3 back in 1991 when the country liberalized its economy. Just a comparison, the FSI in Manhattan is 15. It is a skyscraper city. Mumbai, on the other hand, said, "Nah, we're good with being short." But here's the kicker. The low FSI failed to address the overcrowding problem it was intended to address. Rather, it was doing exactly the opposite. This limited the amount of floor area that could be built, which in effect raised real estate prices to the roof and packed people into overcrowded and substandard accommodation. That is why, instead of impressive glass buildings, one gets a messy jigsaw of slums and overpriced lofts. Imagine Mumbai is a city that is penned into a small piece of land, which is mostly a peninsula and can only go northwards. But thanks to its FSI rules, it spreads outwards, cramming as many people, cars, and tons of stress into as much little available space as possible. You know, in some places they use the phrase, "the sky's the limit"? Well, in Mumbai, it's more like the limit is 5 stories. Urban planners have been banging their heads against the wall for years, saying that increasing the FSI could solve the housing crisis. Think about having more housing units within a lesser area of coverage. A collapse in real estate prices might occur, and perhaps people wouldn't have to wager a kidney to pay for the rent in cities. Thus, the FSI was raised to a range between 2.5 to 5 in Mumbai in 2022, after FSI restrictions had been eased. Now, let's take a moment to talk about the vibe. Well, skyscrapers in India are somewhat similar to that shiny new car that you might see sometimes on the highway. Everybody admires it, but everyone thinks that it is meant for only the very high-end consumer. Living in a high-rise is associated with comfort and privilege, a sign of unfairness in a nation where many dwell in slums. Skyscrapers are also accused of disrupting the general outlook of cities being developed. The idea is that they shield the sun, ruin the skyline, and generally sour the deal for everyone who cannot afford to live in one of them. What is lost is public space, greenery, and sometimes simply the livability of buildings for the sake of height and glass. It's like placing a crown on a town that lacks even a proper sewage system. It feels wrong to many people. This mindset has kept developers and city planners from being available to advocate for the construction of high-rises. If anything, when they're financially feasible and planned well and implemented, the public resists them, fearing that they would turn their city into concrete overgrown jungles, inhabited only by the rich people. To some extent, this cultural resistance could be said to stem from India's colonial history. This type of growth was largely low-rise and of traditional architectural design, typical of British colonial architecture in occupied India. Not surprisingly, the skyscraper craze that characterized most of the Western world in the 20th century never really caught on in India, where high-rise living is culturally associated with rejection of tradition. But, well, let's face it, the state of housing in India's cities is as bleak as it gets. Tens of millions of people are migrating to urban areas in search of a better income and, therefore, a better living. But when they arrive, they're plunged into dirty, cramped, and expensive accommodation, or else into slums where the standards of living are poor at best. This is an indication that skyscrapers could go a long way in solving this problem of housing within urban centers. Going up vertically would mean you would fit more people in a smaller area, thus no need for the constant expansion of cities. It might just help ease traffic circulation, lessen the duration of travel, and probably grant urban dwellers a bit more space. But of course, it's not as simple as throwing up some tall buildings. India would need to invest a tremendous amount of money in the infrastructural development of a power grid, water supply, waste management, and more to support all these tall structures. Besides, the FSI regulations would of course have to be further liberalized to let cities such as Mumbai go vertical. But will India ever wake up to the skyscraper lifestyle? The short answer is maybe. The liberalization of FSI norms is the first step, but there's much more to it. We gotta look at infrastructure as well as attitudes towards life in tall structures. Despite all this, there's been some improvement in the situation. New high-rises are being constructed here and there, and it is not unlikely that as cities become more and more anxious for a remedy to their housing woes, a revolution in the skyline may be expected in the years ahead. India's urbanization is still a work in progress, and while skyscrapers may be the direction the country is headed, the solution to the housing and infrastructure problems the country is facing are not going to be solved overnight. It's not going to be easy, and it will not be fast. But if India can manage vertical growth alongside the population's requirements, we might get to see a few more towering giants standing above the clutter that is vibrant urban India. For now, India's urban experience is horizontal more than vertical, but growth is in the cards. If India gets the policies just right, the investments correct, and public opinion is aligned in this direction, the sky could indeed be the limit. So what do you think? If you were in charge, where would you seek investments from? And how would you go about changing the people's opinions of high-rise living? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.